and we wanted to be, I suppose, again, express our Englishness and our creativity through shamelessly ripping off such august publications.
Would you have done that had you been not so remote? Had you not been in the Mallee or wherever you were living?
Probably not. I mean, I think it was the remoteness that really added to the glamour. I mean, Disneyland is never next door. You know, it's always a little bit out of reach. So I think that was a really key factor.
And the question I also wanted to ask about the stuff you were writing was, and it's probably a question about that goes to the core of what drives the media. As kids, did you feel the need to be sensationalist, or were you just emulating what was going on in newspapers? As kids, did you feel like, oh, this is a big story I should write about?
It was really for me anyway. I can't speak for John or for our next door neighbour Robert, who was the token Australian-born Horsham resident who'd been shanghaied into having some kind of involvement in our soccer magazine empire. And I think the fact that Queen's Park Rangers had blue and white hoops, and that was the same as his beloved Geelong, that was the only way he could really justify it to himself. The fact that he was hanging around with these very daggy pommy kids next door and producing these soccer comics and soccer magazines. But to answer your question, I certainly only ever wanted to emulate Shoot magazine, and Shoot magazine was a magazine for kids, and so there were no lurid headlines. It was the very dour column by Kevin Keegan, the Liverpool star, saying we're expecting a tough 90 minutes against Leeds because they always put in 100%. So that was exactly what I wanted to do. Anything out of left field, I wasn't remotely interested in, because anything humorous, anything weird, I just left that to others.
A lot of the stuff that I read were hilarious.
Yeah,
they really were funny.
Yeah. Well,
so who was the brains behind the funny?
Well, everyone but me, and definitely John. And after we moved from Horsham to Ballarat at the age of 12, we graduated from soccer comics to soccer magazines as such in terms of our publishing machine, and we became friends with Mark Seymour, not the Humson Collectors Mark Seymour, the far more creative and Manchester United obsessed Mark Seymour, whose brother Jason is here this evening. So Jason, thanks for coming along. So Mark was, I think Mark had a personality, and that's definitely separated him from me at the time, because I was a statistics machine, and that was really about it. So, but Mark was a passionate holder of opinions, and so he had a column that was virtually called, What I Reckon, and just as an example, when Manchester United played Saint Etienne in the second round of the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1977, there was a bit of a riot after the game, and Manchester United were thrown out of the competition because of the fans rioting. And Mark was convinced, as a United fan, that it was the French supporters who had been to blame. So he wrote his fierce opinion column about how the French supporters had thrown rotten bread rolls at the United fans. Whether that was true or not, I have no idea. But the headline was, "The French fighted and blamed United." And I would never have let that go through, because Shoot Soccer Magazine didn't have headlines like that. They had proper grammatical headlines.
But you can't say fought and then
no. But that was definitely his rationale, and that really brought it to life. So it was fantastic for me to write about those comics and magazines later on, because the lines that you're referring to, the kind of funny one-liners or whatever, in these soccer magazines were all written by people other than myself, because I was just making sure that every scoreline was accurate and that everyone's name was spelled properly.
Did you actually were you aware at the time? Did you actually evolve as writers, as journalists? Did your writing get better? Did your editorial skills get better as you went along?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that that the brains, I suppose, the intellect behind the operation was my big brother John, who's 18 months older than me. He was always the person who knew that if you're typing on a page, you can put it into 2 columns instead of just all the way across, and it looks fantastic if you do that. So it's like that. I was in my mid-20s, before that really occurred to me, in any kind of
But before
real
we go on,
sense.
Patrick, how many people on average would have been reading each of these editions?
Well, the Red and White was our first magazine in Ballarat when I was 12, and that had a print run of 6. And I'm pretty sure it sold out.
Okay, I hope so.
But
how much did you sell it for?
For 15 cents.
Yeah.
And we were a little bit concerned that we priced ourselves out of the market, to be honest. So we fairly obsessively outlined our printing costs in a fairly shamefaced editorial, which I think was written by my brother. And he just mentioned about 10 different costs that we'd incurred, which had led to this exorbitant fee that was being charged. And the one cost that I remember was typewriter maintenance. And I'm just struggling to imagine either John or myself going into the typewriter maintenance shop and saying, can you please fix our typewriter? I'm fairly sure one of our parents, would have been involved, seeing as like I was 12 and John was 13. But so I'm not sure whether that was in fact a legitimate cost.
Yeah, well, typewriting ribbons don't just grow on trees. And tell me, at the time, were there other friends that you had that were saying to you, "Are you guys nuts?" Was there any of that, or was it just this unquestioning, I'm just going to keep printing this every week for the season, without?
I think people just knew what we were like, and what were you going to do about these guys?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was.
Are you no, not obsessed. Are you as interested in football now as you were when you were a kid?
I think the main difference is that I just don't take it as seriously as I used to. I mean, it is just a silly sport ultimately, and it is an entertainment. It's a diversion from our, from other things going on in our lives. But that doesn't mean that I don't spend 6 hours a day thinking about it. But tell me, Santo.
Yes. Of course, this is a conversation.
What we were, I guess, touching on earlier on about the fact that my brother and I did choose to write these magazines. I guess I'm surprised that you didn't do something similar. And given that I remember seeing you on stage in the Melbourne University Review in 1984, maybe.
Right. Yeah. 1984. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you were what 20 or 21, for instance. So to get to the stage where you were, I guess writing and performing and so on, that obviously didn't come from nothing, but equally it obviously didn't come from writing your own magazines and comics.